Donald, let's say you hadn't decided to become a CPA. What do you think you might have done instead of choosing the CPA route? In other words, what's the path not taken for Donald Meurs?
I think that's an open question. I think if you look back to when I was 18 and chose to go into the accounting profession, I'm from Grande Prairie, Northern Alberta. I think trades is a natural other option for me, something I tried for a couple months. The cold pushed me back into university and knew that was something for me. As I've gotten older and more experiences in life, I've really drawn an aptitude to software design and development was something that had I went back to school or something like along those lines, I would have maybe went that route.
So you would have become a computer geek or something?
Something like that.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the chartered professional accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. Hello, I'm Gordon Turtle, and this is another in our series of Uncommon Sense episodes celebrating the first ever class of CPAs in Alberta who joined the profession without a legacy designation. Just a quick review for listeners who haven't heard our previous episodes with these first ever CPAs. In 2015, the unification of the regulated accounting profession in Alberta was officially completed with the proclamation of the Chartered Professional Accountants Act in July of that year. Prior to unification, there had been 3 different regulated accounting designations. The Alberta accounting profession was part of a national project to bring these 3 designations together as one across Canada under the new name of Chartered Professional Accountant, or CPA. In February 2016, the first ever class of CPA candidates who did not have a legacy designation graduated, earning the straightforward CPA title. Over the course of 2025, Uncommon Sense will be talking with many of these pioneer CPAs. We'll hear their reflections on what it was like to be part of that historic graduating class and where their careers have taken them over the last decade. Our guest on this episode is Donald Meurs CPA, a member of that first class. A 2013 graduate from the University of Alberta, Donald has been on a fast-track career path since crossing the CPA convocation stage in February of 2016. Over the course of the last decade, he has focused his work in areas such as financial transformation, software implementation, performance management, and business process improvement. Until recently, he served as Chief Financial Officer of JDA Ventures, a trucking and crane company based in Grande Prairie, Alberta. JDA provides a range of services to the energy sector across the province. I said he recently served as CFO for GDA because just a few weeks ago, Donald got a new title. He is now the Chief Executive Officer for his company, as well as continuing to serve as CFO. Donald has joined me to talk about his journey to the top of his organization and how his CPA designation has helped him over the course of his career. Welcome, Donald.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for coming in all the way from Grande Prairie. I really appreciate it. And first off, congratulations on recently being named Chief Executive Officer of JDA Ventures. That's an impressive achievement and one that you must be very proud of. So what does it feel like to become a CEO? And how does a person prepare to take on that kind of leadership role?
I think it's exciting for sure. It's been a learning curve. It's something you always strive to be. But as I've stepped into that role, I've learned some things. One is, it can be a little lonely at the top sometimes, but luckily I have a great team that I work with that helps with that. But when there's nobody behind you to make the next decision and you have to make those decisions, and that's something maybe I wasn't prepared for going into that role. But leading into that, I think what's prepared me into this leadership role was being open to lots of opportunities. I was very fortunate in my career to get a lot of those. I had a lot of great mentors, great leaders that I could model myself. I had some bad mentors, some bad leaders that I said, I don't want to be that guy. And, that really helped kind of shape where I'm at today. And, as I've got to lead more people, I've learned that one type of leadership doesn't work for all. And you have to be adaptive in that and keep an open mind to what's going on in the people that you're leading and your organization's environments to adapt the way you're leading them at that time.
Yeah, some interesting perspectives there.
Yeah.
When you first joined the company, were you on like a CEO track, or was this a bit of a surprise for you that you became CEO?
No, it was kind of the plan right from the beginning. With my financial background, they didn't have a CEO as the president just at the time, and he's also the owner. He said, I want to bring you on as a CFO. We're making a lot of transitions right now. And if things go well and you are who you say you are and you can show us that you're capable of it, we would like to move you into that. But it was kind of a 6 to 8 month trial and feeling each other out to really figure out if I would be the right CEO and the person to lead the organization into the next big steps that we're taking.
Fantastic. So I want to come back a little later to your work at JDA and talk more about that. But first, I want to ask you one or two questions that we're asking all the 2016 grads who join us on our podcast. Did you realize at the time of your CPA graduation that you were part of an historic moment in the history of the profession in Alberta? One of the first ever CPAs without one of the previous designations? And did that moment have any significance to you beyond earning your designation?
I think we were all pretty aware that this was new. I think we definitely were reminded of that going through the whole program, because as we finished one module, the next module maybe wasn't even developed yet or completed. So we were reminded of that. So I think as we crossed that stage and, we prepared for that final exam, and not even knowing what the final exam would be and what we're preparing for, we knew when we accomplished that, we were setting the foundation to what maybe CPA has grown into today, and definitely felt very accomplished, as it was challenging at times, not having all the answers, not having a clear path. But I think that's also what made it exciting and maybe what led me down that path.
Did you feel like you were a bit of a guinea pig or something like that?
We definitely were. There was things that, they'd always ask for a review. Did we like that? Did we not? And I would say that not all the softwares worked, not all the programming worked, but, I'm sure they made lots of tweaks along the way. But it was good. It was well put together.
Excellent. Well, I understand there's a bit of a story behind your decision to enter the CPA pathway. Can you tell us what that story is?
Yeah, it's a story for sure. Like I said, I'm from Northern Alberta, so it's a 4.5 hour drive down to Edmonton. I was originally registered in the CMA program. They had an entrance exam. I did the entrance exam and was ready for my orientations. At this time, the CPA had already started their first module, but I was taking the CMA path. That's what my boss was at the time.
So sorry, I'm just going to say the CMA path, that was the old, one of the old legacy designations, the Certified Management Accountant path, just to clarify for our listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I thought that's what I wanted to do. And so I read the email. I drove down all the way from Grande Prairie. I get up in the morning, go to the West End Hotel, and I'm looking around for this orientation that's supposed to be going on, and there's nothing. And I go to the front desk and they say, well, that was yesterday. So when I drove home and I followed up with the CMAs, they kind of had a hard rule, and I learned a little bit about accountability at that time. And they said, no, you can start in the class in January. There's kind of no exceptions here. But I'd heard a little more about the CPA program and said, well, this kind of looks fun and exciting and maybe might be a new challenge. So I took that challenge head on and said, no, I'm good. I think I'll switch over to the CPA program, which there wasn't a lot of non-public accountants in at the time. And yeah, so the January, then I switched into there and put my head down and caught up to the rest of the class.
Now, that's really funny. It's so funny the way things go sometimes. And one little, not a mistake, but one little twist or turn can really affect the whole direction a person's life goes in. So
absolutely.
Thanks for telling us that. Back in 2016, the CPA designation was brand new to Alberta and Canada, for that matter, and most people were only familiar with the old designations of CA, CMA, and CGA. Did you have any concerns that the CPA designation that you'd earned might not be recognized or accepted in the business world because of its newness?
I don't think so. I think maybe that was just being naive to the situation. The U.S. had a model already kind of similar around this. And, I think there's a lot of thought put into this. There's been talk all through my university that this might happen. So maybe naive that they wouldn't recognize it. I thought it was the right decision for the three bodies to merge. So I don't know if I was ever wavering on the fact that it wouldn't be recognized when I was finished.
Well, I have to ask you this question. We're asking all of our first-class guests this question. There was a TV ad that the CPA profession ran nationally back at the time of unification. It's often known as the famous CPA helicopter commercial. The ad depicted a hypothetical CPA in a variety of settings and situations, including riding in a helicopter. That particular image stuck with a lot of people, many of whom felt it was unrealistic, to put it mildly, to suggest that riding in a helicopter would ever be part of a CPA's duties. Do you remember that commercial? And if so, what's your take on the helicopter image? Realistic or not?
I think that it is very funny that you bring this up because I remember that ad very vividly. I thought the exact same thing. It wasn't what I thought an accountant was. It wasn't a path I thought would be there. But the funny thing about that ad is I got to experience it. And I think as we look more into my career and I get to elaborate on that, it's very relevant actually that what that ad represented is there's more than just sitting behind a desk and doing financials and compiling statements for people. There's so much more to this profession. But definitely at the time, it grabbed the attention, which is what they're supposed to do. And I wouldn't say I fully believed that I was going to get to ride in a helicopter one day. And still haven't. But, there was a lot of other opportunities that were very unique and great experiences because of my CPA path that I got to experience because of it.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that because this profession took a bit of heat over that ad. But the funny thing is, everyone remembers it. And I think the purpose of it was to show that as a CPA, you wouldn't just be sitting behind a desk and doing Excel spreadsheets and so on. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Looking back, do you think that the unification of the profession benefited you, your career, and the profession as a whole?
Absolutely. I think that, especially in the path that I wanted to go, I always knew that maybe public practice wasn't my route, but there was maybe stigmatisms or things attached to each body of what that was. But at the end of the day, they all had a common goal, right? They were all trying to protect the interest of their owners and, keep an integrity level to our profession. So I think it was a great decision by them to merge. I think it really brought the standard up on all of them, not just one of them or two of them. It really brought the standard up on all. And, now when you hear that word CPA, you never hear, oh, you're just this or you're just that. We're all CPAs. We all hold the same standard. And we bring that into any organization or any professional opinion we're asked of. So I think it was definitely the right decision for the body. And then for myself as well. I didn't take the traditional path to that CPA route. I haven't took a traditional path since. But that doesn't matter, I don't feel. And I think that, having that CPA designation definitely opened a lot of doors for me.
Well said. Thanks, Donald. Let's talk a bit about your career path. What have you been doing over the last 10 years or so, and what led to your earning the leadership role at JDA Venture?
I'll say that the days can be long and the years are short. It's crazy to think it's been 10 years already. And, I've really reflected back on what the last 10 years has been. And so, I walked out of in February there with my CPA designation, and I'd already started as a junior accountant in that organization when I was in university and already grown to a senior accountant at that point. The next step, I'm always looking at that next mountain to climb. And, the controller, who was a great mentor of mine, still is a mentor of mine, was not going anywhere. And I said, what's next? What's my next challenge? And so I just took any little opportunity I could. There was a project manager that worked for a company that had just built the Nunavut airport and had an office in Grande Prairie, ironically. And he just had asked if after hours I could kind of help him compile some of that information. So I did. And that got me on the radar for head office in Montreal. And then another project came along to do some analysis on our overheads in all of our different divisions and compare 2016, we just came out of kind of a dip in 2015, 2016 after the boom in 2014. And so I did that analysis, which kind of, again, put me on a radar. I didn't know where that was going at that time. Any opportunity I had, whether it was after hours or, a little bit outside of my comfort zone, I took them. And fast forward 3 to 4 months later, it was August. I remember the date very vividly. And I get a phone call from a Denver number, and it's that project manager. And he said, hey, we're starting a new ERP project. We actually started it last week, and we realized we're one short on the finance team. Do you want to fly to Denver on Monday and join this team? And I didn't ask questions. I just said, yeah, that sounds great. Didn't ask my boss, didn't ask my girlfriend at the time. That's now my wife. So I walked into her office, said, you're going to be getting a call from head office. They want me to join this ERP. I'd really like to go. And she 100% supported me. Went and talked to my girlfriend, maybe not quite as supportive at the start. She had a lot more questions that I didn't ask, but she's definitely been behind me the whole way. And that Monday I flew out without a total plan of what I was doing, what an ERP system really was, what it was going to do to my career. And the next 6 months I worked down in Denver, really learned ERP and softwares and worked in between the consultants and the organization. And, it was 4 years was a whirlwind. I got to travel all over the world. I got to my helicopter experience, I'll call it. I got to fly in a private jet. I got to go to some very unique locations, meet tons of people from engineers to data entry people to people not even that don't even know what accountants do from a day-to-day basis. And I also got to work with lots of accountants, CPAs, non-CPAs, that were very good at their job and really learned that there's a lot to this. And, while I feel like the CPA designation opens doors, it shouldn't be the only limiting factor to what creates a good accountant or what creates somebody that can really analyze data. And so after 4 years, I had, I think, well over 400 flights under my belt. I had stayed probably close to 1,000 nights in hotels, and we'd started a family, and that just wasn't for me anymore. So I took a job back as a controller in Grande Prairie. It was a little bit, maybe a step back in my career, but really was wanting to be focused on the family. And then COVID hit, and that changed everything again. It was another quick phone call 4 months later from the company I'd been working for. They said, "Hey, we know why you left. We know you wanted to be back home with your family, but we now realize that we can do this whole thing from Teams and we can do it remotely." And I said, absolutely. I loved what I did. So I jumped back and actually went back as a consultant to them. And that opened the doors for the next 2 years as we had another kid in that time. And it totally changed the way that I think the world meets and the world does these kind of projects. I look back and I kind of said my statistics for a reason is you think of the overhead costs and the money that was spent on us to just be face-to-face, because that was the old way to do these things. And we were so much more efficient when COVID hit and how we rolled out that project to that organization that we were doing at that time. And I was able to do that for 2.5 more years and got a ton more experience. I got a little bit into consulting with some other companies as well at the time. And yeah, that led me into still, as COVID restrictions were lifted, there was more travel in. We were wanting to have our third kid. And I got a phone call again, and there was an opportunity back in Grande Prairie that was very exciting. And, that's what kind of led me to JDA. That was my path. So it was lots to think back on, but some days there was roadblocks in there for sure.
Wow, what a fascinating story. And so you're settled in Grande Prairie now, you got the family and well established. Do you miss that flying around, staying in hotels, traveling? Do you miss all that or not really?
Yes and no. I stayed in a hotel last night as I came down, and my wife always calls me a hotel snob because when you travel that much, you get the diamond status, and you start to realize. And I've been out of it for a couple of years, so I booked at the Hilton Hotel, and I was just a member now, and it was kind of humbling again. So I kind of missed that part, but I like being home every day and watching my kids grow up. So I think I get to experience it slightly still to the travel, but I definitely enjoy being home and being in Grande Prairie where I grew up. So. Oh,
that's awesome. Can you tell us a bit about JDA Ventures and what a day in the life of the company's CEO is like these days?
Absolutely. So JDA Ventures is a fast-growing company based out of Grande Prairie, locally owned by Kim and Jarvis Dawson. And, they brought me on as they really have a vision for growth. And we've really experienced that over the last couple of years. And even since I've came on, I look back at my first year in the organization, and we really don't have a ceiling right now. It's we want to go into new markets. We just opened another branch up in northern BC, and we're looking down into the US and seeing what opportunities are down there. Obviously, there's some outside factors that might limit that at this point. But the day in the life, it's ever evolving. I try to still figure out what my structure is. I think structure is very important in my role, but there's also a lot of chaotic around as you have new situations every day. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that structure is, but I start my day kind of looking at our foundations. We have some metrics that we have for all of our teams. So I try to skim through that. I go back to my financial roots. I check our bank, I check our trial balance, check our P&L, look at our revenues for the previous day, and then I check all of our safety metrics. And then from there, we try to keep all of our internal meetings to the morning, external meetings to the afternoon, to make sure that our organization can be tackling the day properly. And then from there, whatever curveballs that day throws at you.
So with a company like JDV, you're the CEO. Do you find even as CEO, some days you got to go back into the shop and help out with unload a truck, something like that?
Definitely they don't want me unloading trucks. I would say that I'm far away from that. But I definitely interact a lot with the guys in the shop, with our truck drivers every day. They are the heartbeat of our operation. They drive our revenues. They are the most important asset that we have. So I do try to interact with them a lot. I was raised on a farm. My dad was a heavy-duty mechanic. My brother was a welder. So I come from those roots. I can talk the talk, but I can't walk that walk, so I definitely stay away when it comes to actually pulling a wrench or loading anything. I think they would laugh when they see me in a truck one day.
Well, maybe just as well you're not too involved in that then. Your company supports the energy sector in Alberta, and it sounds like throughout Western Canada and perhaps even beyond there. From where you're sitting, what would you say are the biggest challenges these days facing companies like yours that serve Alberta's energy sector? And how is JDA addressing those challenges?
I think there's always going to be the challenge of the oil and gas and the stigmatisms around that from the outside world. I'm born and raised in Grande Prairie. I'm born around this. I do see that it's a clean energy and the way we extract it is very clean. But, the world puts a lot of pressures on us and there's a lot of stigmatism. So as we work through educating people on what it is to extract oil from the ground, what it is to take the natural gas, LNG is really starting to take off and we're starting to get a lot of progress there, which will kind of mitigate our carbon footprint. But the other one is our government's changing, right? That's another thing we're currently right now about to start an election. And, that can bring a lot of uncertainty as we have different opinions on what is the energy sector, the oil and gas sector in Canada, what's the place for it. And the big pressing issue today is what's going on south of us. The president down there has definitely caused a shakeup in not just North America, but definitely the world. And in our markets, we've seen actually slightly an uptick in our work since then, but I don't know if that's going to be sustainable. And I think, long term, there's going to be some maybe negative impacts to this, but, nobody really has answers to that today. So we're just trying to keep open ears, be ready to pivot as things shift, as we learn more information every day on what these tariffs are going to do to our markets.
Yeah, so that uncertainty must make it tough for companies like yours and this energy sector as a whole in Alberta.
Absolutely. You look at everything from, the equipment that we use, a lot of it's all manufactured in Canada. So, the tariffs really impact on what drives our business with our cranes and our trucks. But also, we're helping service the oil and gas. And if oil dips, we feel that instantly, that they cut services back pretty quick. So we got to be ready to pivot. And we've really branched into the cranes and the heavy haul to start to do that and look at more civil infrastructure work and starting to bid on that to, there might be less profits, let's say, but, there's more stability in other markets. So we're starting to look at those options as well and, making sure that our equipment is diverse enough to help us mitigate the dips that we might see in the upcoming future.
Interesting. How would you say your CPA designation helped you achieve your career success? You're CEO after only 10 years since graduating. What types of skills and knowledge that you've acquired as a CPA have benefited you the most, would you say?
I would say that it was honestly the Densmore case the course that you take just before you write the CFE really teaches you how to tackle problems differently. The whole CPA course is kind of geared to that, but it really clicked home when I took that Densmore course and how to really approach those problems and dissect them, not looking for a perfect answer anymore, really looking for finding different ways to get to those answers. And I think I've applied that in many different facets of my job today and trying to really dissect the problem, never coming up with a perfect answer, maybe trying to apply as much criteria as I can to the situation of what I know, right? What do I know from this situation? Don't worry about all the things that you don't know. You don't need to always have all the facts. You're never actually going to have all the facts. So make a decision based on what you know, have some base criteria that you can use to measure those decisions and be ready to pivot when the environment around you pivots.
It sounds like from what you're saying that the CPA designation, as well as being about, accounting and ledgers and Excel and all that, it's also about problem solving and strategic planning in a way. Is that true?
100%. Everybody thinks it's so technical being an accountant. And yes, while it can be technical, I think nobody that's been in the profession for a long time really says that the technical side is their best asset. It's, that it exists. The technical side exists. How do you go get that information? Where does it reside? We all know where the handbooks are. We know that there's criteria on different things. I get asked all the time, do I do my own taxes? No, I don't do my own taxes. I'm smart enough to know that there's a lot going on with taxes and they're always changing. So I hire a professional to do that maybe specialized in that area. And it's knowing that something exists, knowing where to go find that information and knowing when you need to put your expertise in or grabbing another expert that may be focused in that area.
Well, thanks for that. It sounds like you've spent a lot of your time over the last decade in areas such as financial system implementation, budget management, performance management, and so on. Can you talk about how new and emerging technologies are affecting the way these kinds of functions are performed in 2025?
Absolutely. So I talked about that ERP system I was in, and that's what the organization was doing. Now, this was prior to COVID that they started to implement it, but it was really bringing iPads into the field, which was a new thing, and bringing the data entry point to the point where it happens. I think if you look back 15, 20 years, how is data captured, especially in maybe road construction where I was working or in the oil and gas sector, is it would come into the office in a piece of paper and, a data clerk would enter that into a system and it was very delayed. And I think what we've really looked at is how can we get softwares out to where the information is really being gathered and really happening and trying to get that information quicker so we can make decisions quicker. And so that ERP system I was on was kind of focused on that. And it's evolved quite a bit more. AI was not as prevalent at the start of that project. By the time we got to the end, there was an AI department being developed. But I think, is really trying to gather that information sooner so we can make better, more informed decisions faster, trying to close our month ends faster, trying to be able to pivot faster when we can and making sure that we have the right data. But I think, we got to be careful with some of that stuff sometimes because when you bring it closer to the source, maybe it's not as filtered. You got to find ways to filter that data, make sure you're taking out the anomalies and that you're not making an informed decision due to some bad data. So
it sounds like technology then is generally helping you in your work and has in the past and helping the business world in general, which is good. But do you have any concerns? You hear that AI in particular might be a job killer for many professions, including CPAs. So do you have any concerns that technology such as AI might end up replacing CPAs at some point?
Absolutely not. I think that AI can help you gather data. It can help sort data for you, but it can't apply emotion. It can't apply maybe all the outside factors that you can't put into a computer to the situation. While it can help you gather the data, it can't interpret that. And if you were to make decisions just based on what AI told you, I think your customers, your employees would see through that right away, as you need to apply so many other factors when you're making decisions. So, that's what CPAs really do. It's not the technical side of compiling the statements. It's really sitting down and looking at the information that's coming in and helping relate that to operations or other subject matter experts and helping them make better informed decisions and you yourself making better informed decisions for your organization. But I think AI will never have that emotion, and while it can help, it'll never replace.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. Glad to hear that you feel that way. I want to switch gears a bit and get your thoughts on leadership in today's business world. You touched on this a bit at the opening of our podcast, but as a CFO and then CEO, what do you think are the most essential characteristics of a good leader in business?
I think the one that we use a lot in our organization is be curious, right? Be curious to what's going on, always to every situation. Don't just apply what you already know. Be curious to maybe why that situation arose and what other alternatives you can have. The other characteristic is be vulnerable, right? So, sometimes, and I'm still learning this characteristic as, I've moved into another role, is making sure that I can still be vulnerable when I have to, but be strong when I also have to as well. And, that leads into the last one, which is you really want to just be self-aware. And being self-aware is looking at what's changing in your environment and how are you coming across in those situations and making sure that you are being self-aware to the people around you and to the environment around you. And, you have to change your leadership style sometimes based on that. And that's really important to do that and not be so hard-fisted in the way you lead.
Those are great tips, Donald. And, they're useful for any kind of leadership role, whether it's at work or maybe in your community as a volunteer. I can really see how those tips would apply in a lot of different kinds of situations. Let me ask you this. What have you learned about yourself from being in a leadership role?
I've learned that, sometimes it can be hard, like I just said, to be vulnerable. I think it's sometimes hard to be curious. You can get wrapped up in the moment sometimes, and when you're the leader, you gotta, like you say, take a step back, reassess, and make sure the message that you're bringing into that is good. But I think I'm still learning about what being in this role is for myself, and trying to evolve myself as a leader every day. But when you're in these roles, when you speak, make sure it's with purpose, right? Make sure that it's genuine, right? Never go away from your values. Every time you do, you always find that it doesn't end up. So if you can stick to your values and to your roots, that'll always lead you the right way. And I think, I'm still learning that. I'm still trying to find out exactly what the next step in my leadership path is. Got to experience the CEO, but I don't think this is the end. I think there's more as this organization grows and my career path grows. So I think, I'm learning that there's still something else out there in this leadership role.
Well, it's good to hear that you don't think you know it all now because you're a CEO. It's a constant process of developing as a person and as a leader. So, yeah, thanks for that, Donald. If you were talking today to a current post-secondary business student, would you recommend the CPA designation to them? Why or why not?
Absolutely. I love talking to people. I get asked lots from different mothers and fathers to say, hey, my son's thinking about going, or my daughter's thinking about going down the accounting path. Do you want to speak to them? And I always love those conversations because I think that as my career path kind of shows, I've never worked in public practice. I have a very different career path. I've got to do a lot of cool things and sit behind a computer and just process data or compile financial statements. So I love talking to people and asking them, why do you want to do the CPA path? Why do you want to become an accountant or a chartered professional accountant? And, when you start to hear their answers, sometimes it's like, I think maybe this isn't exactly for you because it's a little more, or vice versa. I say to people, I think you're going to be phenomenal one day. And it can be so much and you can create your own path with it. So I just always find it interesting to hear. And I know what I thought when I was 18 years old or 17 years old and what I thought an accountant was to what I think it is today. And I really try to tell people that it can be a lot of different things.
Do you tell these young people that they'll probably get to stay in really fancy hotels? Is that a selling point that you use?
I say you could if you open yourself to the opportunities, but I say maybe you'll get a helicopter ride one day. You never know. But, I've got to meet, like I said, when I traveled, I got to meet accountants from all different parts of North America. And, they're hearing their paths and stuff like that. We all took a different one there. So I tell everybody I talk to, I said, take all the opportunities you can. It's not a restricting career path. It's a very open one. So jump in with 2 feet.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Donald. And I just have one final question before you wrap up. And this is a question we're asking a lot of our guests on Uncommon Sense. What has surprised you the most about being a CPA over the last decade? Is there anything different from what you expected back in 2016 in terms of being a CPA?
I would say yes, absolutely. I think 2016 and the start of when I went into it in 2015, it's growing a lot. And, as the body's been unified now for 10 years, a lot more doors have been open. I think I alluded to this early in the podcast that all the bodies got elevated when they merged. And, we've created a great profession, something that's highly respected. We're held to a very high standard. And when we put our influence or our opinion into things, it's truly valued. So I think I'm surprised when people take what I say so seriously. But I look back at maybe my background and the CPA program and what it kind of built into me and why people value that so much. And I think that's really important. I'm really excited to see where the CPA profession grows to.
Thanks for that perspective, Donald. And thanks again for taking the time to travel from Grande Prairie to Edmonton to join me on Uncommon Sense today. It's been such a pleasure to hear about your career journey to the CEO's chair, as well as your views on the value of the CPA designation itself. So thanks again for coming in.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. his generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshies CPA Knowledge Centre, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.